If you've got an idea for a new business or a side hustle or the way to launch a new product inside of an existing business, but you're struggling to execute on any one of those, this message that I'm going to go through here is exactly designed for you because there's something that you need to overcome. And it's actually just one thing. And I've launched over 22 products in the last 3 years. And so I know a thing or two about what it actually takes to get a new idea out of your head and into the marketplace. Now, it doesn't mean all 22 of the things that I've launched in the last 3 years have been successful, but I learned something from each one. And there's actually one common thing that went along with each of those things. But for right now, just recognize that you probably have ideas. People who are in business or not even in business yet, they've all got ideas. And you run into these people all the time where they kind of want to keep it on the DL, right? Like, I've got this idea, but I don't want to tell anybody about it because I'm worried somebody's going to steal it. Well, don't worry, nobody's going to steal it because nobody really wants to do the work to bring that thing to market. And it's funny, I remembered when I was listening to a conversation like this recently about one of my product launches that happened way back in 2016, which was an apparel brand, which I've talked about on this channel, on the show before. And that ended up being a failure, but I executed in getting it to market. And I remember there was a time when it was going to be dropped off, all the inventory, our very first order was going to be dropped off at a place that was about 35 minutes away from my house on a Friday afternoon. And the delivery guy was like, yeah, I can't do it Friday afternoon. I'm going to be able to deliver it next Tuesday when I was going to be gone. So I'm like, how are we going to make this happen? So I've got to get this stuff here. We're going to store everything in my garage. So I ended up renting a moving truck and getting one of my buddies and driving down to this place 35 minutes away and picking it up. And the conversation we were having on the way down there was like, you know, he was telling me, man, a lot of people have ideas, but you're here making it happen. And that was the first time that I really recognized that the actual making of the idea happen is something that's pretty rare. Because like I said, everybody's got ideas, but they simply don't go forward with them. They're nervous about them for whatever reason. And there's a lot of stories that people have in their mind about why they're not going to launch. And money might be one of those stories, right? I don't have enough money to launch this business. Well, one of the things I want you to consider is that every single company in the top Fortune 100 right now started with less than $25,000 to get going. Like, this is operating business capital. So the story about money doesn't really hold any water with this. Regardless of how little you have, there are ways to do organic marketing to get your product or idea out there that will wind up helping you actually distribute this thing to market. There are Kickstarter campaigns. There's all sorts of different options that we didn't even have available to us 10 years ago. So money can't be it. But another thing you might be thinking about in terms of like why your product hasn't launched yet is time. Time is a big thing where it's like, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough time. Everybody's got the same amount of time. Whether you're launching products or not, you've got the same amount of time. There are 24 hours in every day, 7 days in every week, and you wind up going on about this with the same amount of time. So it's a story that you don't have enough time to do that. Ultimately, what this comes down to, if you're struggling to launch, and everything I had to overcome, the one thing that I had to overcome each time I was going to do a product launch was fear. Fear turned into what ifs. What if I launch this and nobody buys it? Which, by the way, has happened to me. What if I launch this and my guess on the colors or the sizes was wrong? Or what happens if I launch this and I put ads out there, or I start making posts and everybody makes fun of me, or everybody starts talking shit about me? We turn these what ifs into giant monsters. And these monsters block the door to the life that we want to create, because one of the things that I really, really believe is that whatever life you want to create is predicated on the business you're willing to build. It really is. So these monsters stand between you and the life that you want to create. But the reality is that we build up these monsters to be huge, but it's all a story of your mind. It's a story of your mind to a spot where you start to believe these lies to yourself about the size of the monster and all those what ifs. What if I waste all my money? What if I don't get anything back? Well, there are three primary ways that I've found to overcome this fear when it comes to launching a product, getting your idea out into the marketplace. And part of it relates to that story that created the giant monster that's in your head. And you simply need to ask yourself, is it the truth? Because so often we just believe the stories, which are ideas that pop into our mind that aren't the truth, because we don't take the time to examine them. We don't take a time to look at what the actual facts of the situation are, and instead we instantly believe the story. And instantly believing the story is one of the things that holds you back from launching the product and creating the life that you want through the business that you're willing to build. This is a massive, massive hang up. There's a great book about this. It's called Loving What Is. It's by an author named Byron Katie. And it's examining people's stories about more interpersonal relationships, but it's very applicable to business and what goes on inside of your own mind as you're telling yourself what could or couldn't happen, those what if scenarios that go down when you try to launch a new product or service. So you've got to examine the story and figure out if the story is true. And if you tell yourself, yes, that story is true, then ask yourself, is it 100% true? Meaning there is no chance that any of that story is false. More often than not, what you're gonna find is that either the original story is false, or when you ask yourself, are you 100% sure it's true? You're not going to be able to answer yes. This is all to help you understand the facts and the probability of you wind up having success. Second thing you've got to overcome when it comes to launching a new product is recognize a very fundamental fact, is that almost nothing works like it should right out of the gate. That just doesn't happen. You think it does because you see stories on The Profit on CNBC or Shark Tank, which I think is still on ABC, but it might be on CNBC only now. I have no idea. It's been a long time since I watched that show. But you see all these stories of overnight success. You could be reading about them too in Entrepreneur or Inc. magazine or Fast Company, and it seems like they launch and it just works. But that's not the case, because that entrepreneur probably launched 50 or 60 times prior to it actually being successful. So no matter what, your mindset around the launch needs to be that you're going to get information. And that might be data that comes back to you from either user feedback or ads and their performance or conversion rates, or any host of numbers that go along with launching a new business or side hustle or a product inside of your existing business. You've got data there. And what that data does is it tells you a story if you know how to read it. It's like a scoreboard in any game. If you go to a football game, there's a scoreboard. And that scoreboard tells you a story about how the game is going. You can look at all sorts of stats, but the scoreboard's the ultimate one. And what that tells you is what we need to get better at. So let's say you went to that football game and there's a stat on the scoreboard that talks about yards per rush. So every time a quarterback hands the ball off to the running back, he gets 2.2 yards. Well, that might tell the people that they need a better blocking strategy in order to get more yardage per every rush. They didn't get the result they wanted, but they got data that tells them what they need to do next. Every product launch goes like this. You never get it and just hit it out of the park right away, or if you do, congratulations. I haven't done that myself. But you find data each time that tells you what to do. The key is you've got to, one, track it. So tracking data is critical for any single launch that you try to do. But two, you also have to understand what it means by figuring out what lever to pull to actually change what the result looks like. Everything's got a cause and everything's got an effect. And so you find the effects that you don't like and you figure out what the causes of those were, and that helps you change what the effects are and get a better result that you're ultimately looking for. And the third piece of this, and this is something that I notice when I walk into a Starbucks, I see people there that are clearly there with business. They're like business partners, and they're watching YouTube videos on how to get motivated. And I can just see the conversation going on with these people hey, we're gonna get started on that right after we watch this video. We need some motivation first. And so they go to YouTube and they find one of the motivational channels and they listen to all this motivation about yes, rah, 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 you can do it, we're building up, and so on and so forth. I'm gonna have you consider that you're not looking for motivation. What you're ultimately looking for is permission. You're looking for permission to go. You're trying to convince yourself of your own capabilities and the capabilities of the performance of your product. That's what you're trying to convince yourself of, and you need to give yourself permission to go forward. I'm gonna have you consider that when you look for motivation, which is energy that comes from outside of you, that you've got to pay back with interest, by the way. Whenever we look for motivation, it's because we don't have the confidence. We're not convinced in our own minds that we've got enough to make it happen. everybody that starts feels this way. So if you feel this way and that's one of the reasons that's holding you back and that's one of your monsters, recognize that you must give yourself the permission to go. Which is a lot easier to do when you flip your mindset to, I'm gonna make $1 million in my first year, to, I'm going to find out what works and doesn't work about this product as soon as I launch it. By capturing the data, understanding it, reading it, measuring it, making pivots that are necessary through that. And it makes it even easier when you recognize the story, which is the first thing that I talked about. Is this thing that I think is this big monster, all these what ifs, are they true? And if they're not true, well, then you get to examine the facts, and that gives you more confidence to move forward. So no matter where you are in your process, if you've just got an idea in your mind, or if you're getting close, but you just can't find that last 10% you need to actually get this thing into the marketplace, remember those 3 things. And as always, the most important thing I want you to do is not just learn listening to this message. That won't do you anything. That won't do you any good. It's like people who buy self-help books and leave them on the shelf. It's shelf-help, not self-help. What I want you to do is take action. I want you to launch whatever it is that you're trying to launch. I want you to take your idea and take it to the next step, and the next step, and the next step until it gets to the marketplace. Do something with what you learned today. Actually apply it. Because when you apply it and you hit very, very simple singles, that's going to wind up being the big win that you're ultimately looking for.